The smell of cheap beer and cigarette smoke hung thick in the air at the Hendersons' annual barbecue party. I should have known better than to let Darla drag me to another one of these small-town social disasters, but 20 years of marriage had taught me to pick my battles. This wasn't going to be one of them. "Come on, Eli. Don't be such a killjoy," Darla laughed, her voice already slurred from her third wine cooler. She was sitting cross-legged on the Hendersons' worn carpet, part of a circle that included most of our neighbors and half the town's gossips. "It's just a harmless game. Truth or dare." At 42 years old, I was watching grown adults play truth or dare like we were back in high school. The irony wasn't lost on me that most of these people had peaked in high school anyway. "I'll play," I said, settling down next to my wife. Maybe if I participated, we could get through this faster and head home. I had an early morning shift as the county's game warden, and tracking poachers required more energy than I was willing to spend on party games. The bottle spun around the circle a few times, landing on various neighbors who chose increasingly embarrassing dares or revealed mundane secrets about their boring lives. When it finally stopped pointing at Darla, she clapped her hands together like a child. "Truth," she announced immediately, which surprised me. Darla usually chose dares she loved being the center of attention, loved showing off. I figured I'd keep it light. "What's your darkest fantasy?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Around the circle, people leaned forward slightly. That hungry look in their eyes that comes when ordinary people sense drama brewing. Darla's face flushed, and for a second I thought she might change her answer to dare. Instead, she leaned toward me, close enough that I could smell the artificial cherry from her wine cooler mixed with her perfume. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but in the sudden quiet of the room, everyone heard her clearly. "I want you to watch while I do it with your brother Jake. Maybe you'll learn something." The room went dead silent. Someone's beer bottle clinked against the coffee table. In the distance, I could hear the Hendersons' dog barking in the backyard. Darla immediately started laughing, that high-pitched giggle she used when she was nervous. "Oh my God, you should see your face. I'm kidding, obviously. It's just a game, right?" But I wasn't laughing. Neither was anyone else. The thing about small towns is that everyone knows everyone's business, and everyone had seen the way my younger brother Jake looked at my wife. They'd seen how she flirted with him at family gatherings, how she always found excuses to touch his arm when she talked to him. "Hell of a punchline, Darla," I said, standing up. "I'll be laughing all the way to therapy." I walked out of that house and didn't look back, even when I heard Darla calling my name from the front porch. The drive home was silent except for the sound of gravel crunching under my truck tires and the distant rumble of thunder promising rain. Our house sat on 3 acres of pine forest about 10 miles outside of town, close enough to the lake that you could smell the water on humid days. I'd built most of it myself over the years, adding rooms as we needed them, fixing problems as they arose. It was the kind of place where a man could think, where the only sounds were wind through trees and the occasional call of a loon. Darla didn't come home until after midnight. I heard her car in the driveway, heard her fumbling with her keys at the front door. By then, I was sitting in my recliner in the dark, nursing a beer and staring out the window at the lake. "Eli?" she called softly. "Are you awake?" Unfortunately. She flicked on the living room light, and I could see she'd been crying. Her makeup was smeared and her blonde hair was disheveled. For a moment, she looked like the girl I'd married 20 years ago, vulnerable and uncertain. "We need to talk," she said. "Do we? Because I thought we covered everything pretty thoroughly at the party." "That wasn't fair, and you know it." She sat down on the couch across from me. "You put me on the spot in front of everyone. I panicked. So you decided to tell everyone you want to sleep with my brother?" I was trying to be shocking. It was supposed to be funny. I took a long drink of my beer and studied my wife's face. 20 years of marriage teaches you to read expressions, to know when someone is telling the truth and when they're scrambling to cover their tracks. The thing is, Darla, jokes are supposed to be funny, and usually they're not about things people actually want to do. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've seen how you look at Jake. Hell, everyone's seen it. So when you say something like that, even as a joke, it makes people wonder. She stood up abruptly, her face flushing red. "You're being ridiculous. Jake is your brother. He's family. I would never..." "Never what? Never flirt with him at every family gathering? Never find excuses to be alone with him? Never light up like a Christmas tree every time he walks into a room? You're paranoid." "Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you just told a room full of people something you've been thinking about for a long time." The fight escalated from there. Voices raised, accusations flew, and old grievances surfaced like bodies in a lake. By 3 in the morning, I was packing a bag while Darla sobbed in our bedroom, alternating between apologies and anger. "Fine," she finally screamed. "Leave. Run away like you always do when things get difficult." "I'm not running away," I said, zipping up my duffel bag. "I'm giving us both some space to figure out what we really want." I spent the next week at a motel in town, going to work each day and coming back to a room that smelled like disinfectant and other people's mistakes. Darla called twice, but I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to hear more lies, and I wasn't ready to forgive. On Friday afternoon, my phone rang while I was writing up a report on some teenagers I'd caught fishing without licenses. The caller ID showed my daughter's number. "Hey, Maddie," I answered. "How's college treating you?" "Dad." Her voice was tight, strained. "We need to talk. Can you meet me somewhere?" "What's wrong?" "I can't do this over the phone. Can you drive up to campus tomorrow? There's something you need to know, and I'm tired of keeping it secret." My stomach dropped. In my experience, conversations that started with, "There's something you need to know," never ended well. "How bad is it?" "Bad, Dad. Really bad." The drive to Maddie's college took 2 hours through winding mountain roads that were just starting to show the first hints of fall color. I'd made this trip dozens of times over the past year, but this time felt different. There was a weight in my chest that had nothing to do with the elevation gain. I found Maddie waiting for me at a small coffee shop near campus, hunched over a cup of tea with her dark hair falling across her face. At 19, she looked more like her mother every day, but she'd inherited my stubborn streak and my tendency to overthink everything. "Thanks for coming," she said when I sat down across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "You're my daughter, Maddie." "Of course I came." She looked up at me then, and I could see she'd been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy, and there were dark circles underneath them, like she hadn't been sleeping. "I heard about the party," she said. "Mom told me you moved out." Word travels fast. "She said you overreacted to a joke, that you're being controlling and jealous." I signaled the waitress for coffee before responding. "What do you think?" "I think Mom lies a lot more than you do." The waitress brought my coffee, and I used the interruption to study my daughter's face. She was nervous, fidgeting with her napkin and avoiding eye contact. "What did you want to tell me?" I asked. Maddie took a shaky breath. "Last summer, when I was home from school, I heard Mom and Uncle Jake arguing in the kitchen. I was upstairs, but they were being loud and sound carries in that house." "What were they arguing about?" "Me." She finally looked directly at me. "Mom was upset about something, and she said maybe she should just tell me the truth. That maybe I deserved to know that you weren't my real father." The coffee cup slipped in my hand, and hot liquid splashed across the table. I grabbed napkins to clean it up, buying myself time to process what she just said. "And what did Jake say?" "He told her she was being stupid, that it would destroy the family and ruin everything. He said I was your daughter in every way that mattered, and that's how it should stay." I sat back in my chair, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. "How long have you been carrying this around?" "Since July. I've been going crazy trying to figure out what to do with it. Part of me hoped I'd misunderstood, but after what happened at the party..." "You think it's true?" Tears started flowing down her cheeks. "I don't know, Dad, but I needed to tell you. You deserve to know what I heard." We sat in silence for a few minutes while Maddie cried, and I tried to wrap my head around the possibility that my daughter, the best thing in my life, might not actually be mine. The timing would work. Jake had lived with us for a few months when Darla was pregnant, after he'd gotten laid off from a construction job. "What do you want me to do with this information?" I asked finally. "I want to know the truth, whatever it is." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Okay, but you need to understand that whatever we find out, nothing changes between us. You're my daughter, Maddie. Biology doesn't change that. Promise?" "Promise." The drive home was a blur of anger and memories. I kept replaying conversations, looking for clues I'd missed. Jake had always been good with Maddie, always seemed to have a special connection with her. I'd thought it was just because he was the fun uncle, the guy who showed up with presents and took her fishing. Now I wondered if there was more to it. I stopped at a pharmacy in town and bought a DNA test kit, the kind you could order online, but they sold over the counter now. The instructions were simple. Swab the inside of your cheek, mail it in, wait 2 weeks for results. Getting Maddie's sample was easy. She was expecting it. Getting Jake's would be trickier. but I had an idea. That weekend, I drove to Jake's house on the pretense of returning some tools I'd borrowed. He lived in a fixer-upper on the other side of town, the kind of place where everything was perpetually half-finished. The front porch sagged, the paint was peeling, and there were car parts scattered across the front yard. "Eli," he said when he opened the door, seeming genuinely happy to see me. "I was wondering when you'd show up. Heard you and Darla are having some problems." "Nothing that can't be worked out," I lied. "Mind if I come in? I brought your socket set back." Jake's house was exactly what you'd expect from a bachelor who worked construction and spent most of his free time drinking beer. The living room was cluttered with magazines, empty bottles, and dirty clothes. But it was the kitchen that interested me. Specifically, the coffee mug sitting by the sink, with Jake's lips prints still visible on the rim. While Jake was in the bathroom, I quickly swabbed the inside of the mug and sealed the sample in the provided container. It felt like stealing, but I needed to know the truth. "Want a beer?" Jake called from the kitchen when he came back. "Can't stay long," I said. "Just wanted to return your tools and see how you're doing." "I'm good. Worried about you, though. Darla's pretty upset." "I'm sure she is." Jake studied my face. "You want to talk about what happened at the party?" "Not particularly. She was just drunk, you know. People say stupid things when they're drunk." I looked at my younger brother, really looked at him. He was 3 years younger than me, but we'd always looked similar. Same dark hair, same green eyes, same stubborn jaw. If he was Maddie's father, there wouldn't be any obvious physical differences to give it away. "Do they?" I asked. "Say stupid things? Or do they say things they've been thinking about but were too sober to admit?" Jake's face flushed. "I don't know what you're implying, but I'm not implying anything. I'm just trying to understand how my wife could think it was funny to tell a room full of people that she fantasizes about sleeping with my brother." "Eli, come on. You know Darla. She loves drama, loves being the center of attention. It didn't mean anything." I stood up to leave. "Maybe you're right, or maybe it meant everything." The DNA results took exactly 2 weeks to come back. I was sitting in my motel room when I opened the email on my laptop, and the words on the screen seemed to swim in front of my eyes. Probability of paternity, 0.0%. I read it 3 times before it sank in. Then I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the sound of traffic outside and the couple in the next room arguing about money. Maddie wasn't my daughter. My wife had been sleeping with my brother for at least 20 years, and I'd been too blind or too trusting to see it. But as I sat there in that dingy motel room, something else started to grow alongside the pain and betrayal. It was cold and calculating, and it felt like the moment when you're hunting and you finally get a clear shot at your target. I was going to make them pay for what they'd taken from me, but I was going to be smart about it. The plan came to me gradually, like dawn breaking over the lake. I'd always been a patient hunter, willing to wait for the perfect shot, and this wouldn't be any different. Jake and Darla had spent 20 years playing me for a fool. Now it was my turn to control the game. I started with Jake because he was the easier target. My brother had always been impulsive, prone to making stupid decisions when he was emotional. All I had to do was push the right buttons. I called him on a Tuesday morning, making my voice sound tired and defeated. "Jake, it's Eli. I was wondering if you wanted to go hunting this weekend, like old times." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Hunting? I thought you were mad at me." "I'm mad at Darla. You didn't do anything wrong." The lie came easily. "I've been thinking about what you said about her just being drunk and stupid. Maybe you're right." "So you're not, you don't think that she and I—" "Of course not. You're my brother. I trust you." Another pause, longer this time. "Where were you thinking of going?" "The old cabin up on Bear Mountain, Dad's place. I thought we could spend the weekend, do some serious hunting, talk things through like men." Jake agreed immediately, probably relieved that I wasn't suspicious of him. We arranged to meet at the cabin on Saturday morning, and I spent the rest of the week preparing. The cabin had been in our family for 3 generations, a rough-hewn log structure about 30 miles into the wilderness. There was no cell phone service, no electricity, and the nearest neighbor was at least 10 miles away. It was the perfect place for a conversation that needed to stay private. I arrived at the cabin before dawn on Saturday, carrying enough supplies for a week, even though we'd only planned to stay 2 days. The morning was crisp and clear, with that sharp autumn air that made every breath feel clean. Jake showed up an hour later in his beat-up pickup truck, looking nervous but trying to hide it behind his usual cocky grin. Man, I haven't been up here in years, he said, shouldering his rifle and backpack. Remember when Dad used to bring us up here as kids? I remember a lot of things, I said. Come on, let's get settled and then head out. I scouted some good spots yesterday. We spent the morning hiking deeper into the woods than we'd ever gone as children, following game trails that wound through dense pine forest and over rocky ridges. I led the way, occasionally stopping to point out deer sign or comment on the weather, keeping up a steady stream of conversation designed to put Jake at ease. It wasn't until we were about 5 miles from the cabin, in a remote valley where the trees grew so thick that the sunlight barely penetrated, that I finally stopped pretending. This is far enough, I said, setting down my pack next to a fallen log. Far enough for what? Jake asked. I haven't seen any deer sign for the last mile. We're not hunting deer, Jake. Something in my voice must have warned him, because he took a step backward and his hand moved instinctively toward his rifle. What are you talking about? I pulled the DNA test results from my jacket pocket and held them out to him. I'm talking about the fact that you've been screwing my wife for 20 years. I'm talking about the fact that Maddie is your daughter, not mine. Jake's face went white. He stared at the papers without taking them, and I could see his mind racing, trying to figure out how much I knew and how much I was guessing. Eli, I can explain. Can you? Because I'd love to hear the explanation for how my brother and my wife decided to destroy my life and then let me live a lie for 2 decades. It wasn't supposed to happen, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was just once, when Darla was pregnant and you were working those double shifts. She was lonely and I was drunk and... Once? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jake, I've got DNA evidence that says you're Maddie's father. Unless you figured out a way to get someone pregnant from a single encounter 20 years ago. I'm guessing it was more than once. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from when we were kids, and he'd gotten caught doing something he shouldn't have. Okay, it was more than once. But it ended when Maddie was born. We both agreed it was wrong, and we stopped. Did you? Or did you just get better at hiding it? I swear to you, Eli, nothing has happened between us since then. I know how it looks, but how it looks? I stood up, and Jake took another step backward. It looks like you and my wife made a fool out of me. It looks like every family gathering, every holiday, every time I saw you playing with Maddie and thought what a great uncle you were, I was actually watching her real father pretend to be something else. She doesn't know, Jake said quickly. We never told her. We never planned to tell her. But she figured it out anyway. Kids aren't stupid, Jake. She heard you and Darla arguing about it. Jake's face crumpled. Oh, God. Is that why you wanted to come up here? To tell me that she knows? Partly. I picked up my rifle and checked to make sure it was loaded. But mostly I wanted to have this conversation somewhere private, somewhere we wouldn't be interrupted. Eli, please. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But let's talk about this rationally. Let's figure out how to move forward. Move forward? I started walking deeper into the woods, forcing Jake to follow me. You want to move forward? After you stole 20 years of my life? I didn't steal anything. You're still Maddie's father in every way that matters. You raised her. You loved her. I loved a lie. I stopped walking and turned to face him. Every time I looked at her, I saw my daughter. Every time I was proud of something she accomplished. Every time I worried about her. Every time I planned for her future. All of it was based on a lie that you and Darla decided to tell me. We were deep in bear country now, in a part of the forest where the undergrowth was thick and the animal trails crisscrossed in confusing patterns. I'd been here before, many times, but Jake hadn't. He was already looking around nervously, trying to keep his bearings. Where are we going? He asked. There's something I want to show you, I said. A place Dad brought me once when I was about 12. He said it was important for a man to know what real wilderness looked like, what it felt like to be truly alone. We walked for another 20 minutes, climbing steadily uphill through terrain that grew increasingly rough. Finally, I stopped at the edge of a small clearing where a rocky outcropping overlooked a deep ravine. This is it, I said. Beautiful, isn't it? Jake was breathing hard from the climb, and sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cool air. Yeah, it's nice, but I think we should head back. It's going to be dark soon. In a few hours, I agreed. Plenty of time. Time for what? I sat down on a boulder and gestured for Jake to do the same. Time for you to tell me the truth, all of it, from the beginning. Jake remained standing, his rifle clutched in his hands like a security blanket. I already told you the truth. No, you told me a story. You told me it started when Darla was pregnant and ended when Maddie was born. But that's not true, is it? Eli, because if it ended 20 years ago, why was Darla making jokes about wanting me to watch her sleep with you? Why do you two still look at each other like you're sharing a secret? Why does my wife light up every time you walk into a room? Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring down into the ravine. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low I had to strain to hear him. It never really ended, he admitted. We tried to stop, but what? But we couldn't. We love each other, Eli. We always have. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting them. Hearing it confirmed was different from suspecting it. How long? I asked. Since high school. Since before you two started dating. I closed my eyes and tried to control my breathing. So when I married her, she was already pregnant with Maddie. She thought the baby was yours because you two had been together too. But after Maddie was born and started looking more like me, you knew. You both knew. And you let me believe she was mine. We didn't know for sure until she was older, and by then you loved her so much. We couldn't take that away from you. I stood up abruptly, my hands shaking with rage. You couldn't take that away from me? You'd already taken everything else. Jake raised his rifle slightly, not quite pointing it at me, but making it clear he was ready to defend himself. Calm down, Eli. Let's talk about this like adults. Adults? I laughed bitterly. Adults don't sleep with their brother's wife for 20 years. Adults don't let someone raise a child that isn't theirs without telling them the truth. What did you want us to do? Destroy 3 lives to make ourselves feel better? I wanted you to be honest with me. I wanted the chance to make my own decisions about my life instead of living a lie that you two created. We stared at each other across the clearing, 2 brothers who had become strangers, both holding rifles and both angry enough to use them. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows through the trees, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. So what happens now? Jake asked. I looked around the clearing, at the rocky outcroppings and the dense forest that surrounded us, and I made a decision that I'd been considering ever since I'd gotten the DNA results. Now you find your own way home, I said. What do you mean? I shouldered my rifle and picked up my pack. I mean, I'm leaving. You can follow these trails back to the cabin if you're smart enough, or you can spend the night in the woods. Either way, you're on your own. You can't be serious. It's getting dark, and I don't know these trails like you do. You should have thought of that before you decided to betray me. I started walking back toward the main trail, but Jake called after me. Eli, wait, this is crazy. You can't just leave me out here? I turned back to look at him one last time. You left me in the dark for 20 years, Jake. Let's see how you like it. I walked away then, following a game trail that would take me back to the cabin by a roundabout route. Behind me, I could hear Jake calling my name, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. It wasn't until I was almost back to the cabin that I heard the roaring. The sound that came echoing through the forest was something between a scream and a roar, followed by thrashing in the underbrush and then an awful, sudden silence. I knew what it was immediately. I'd heard it once before, when I was 16 and witnessed a hiker get too close to a mother bear with cubs. I stopped walking and listened, but there was nothing more. Just the normal sounds of the forest settling into evening quiet. Part of me wanted to go back, to make sure Jake was okay. But a larger part of me, the part that had been carrying 20 years of betrayal and lies, kept walking toward the cabin. Whatever had happened in those woods, Jake had brought it on himself. I spent the night at the cabin, lying awake in my sleeping bag and staring at the ceiling. Every few hours, I'd step outside and listen for sounds of Jake making his way back, but I never heard anything. By morning, I knew he wasn't coming back. I packed my gear carefully, making sure to leave no trace that I'd ever been there with anyone else. Then I drove Jake's truck deeper into the woods and left it near a popular hunting spot where it would eventually be found. I hiked back to where I'd left my own vehicle and drove home. The call came 3 days later. I was at work, investigating reports of illegal hunting near the state park, when my phone rang. Eli, this is Officer Trudy Morrow with the state police. I'm afraid I have some bad news about your brother. I sat down heavily in my truck. What kind of bad news? His truck was found abandoned near Bear Mountain, and we've been conducting a search. We found his body this morning. His body? It appears he was attacked by a bear. I'm sorry, Eli. I know this must be a shock. I was quiet for a long moment, processing the information. Where exactly did you find him? About 5 miles from where his truck was parked, in a remote area near the old mining claims. It looks like he was hiking alone and surprised a bear. Probably a mother with cubs getting ready for winter. That doesn't sound like Jake. He knew better than to hike alone in bear country. People make mistakes when they're in unfamiliar territory. The medical examiner will conduct a full investigation. But right now, it looks like a tragic accident. Officer Morrow asked me to come to the station to answer some questions, which I'd been expecting. I drove there directly from work, still wearing my game warden uniform, and tried to look like a man who'd just lost his brother instead of a man who'd caused his brother's death. When was the last time you saw Jake? Officer Morrow asked. She was a tough-looking woman in her 40s with graying hair and skeptical eyes. About a week ago, I stopped by his house to return some tools I'd borrowed. How did he seem? Normal. Maybe a little worried about me and Darla having problems, but nothing unusual. Did he mention any plans to go hiking or hunting? Not to me. Jake wasn't much of a solo outdoorsman. He preferred hunting with other people. Officer Morrow made notes as I talked, occasionally asking follow-up questions about Jake's state of mind, his experience in the woods, and whether he'd seemed depressed or suicidal. I answered everything honestly, or as honestly as I could, without incriminating myself. Is there any reason you can think of that Jake would have gone to Bear Mountain alone? She asked. I pretended to consider the question. Our family has an old cabin up there. Maybe he wanted to check on it, make sure it was secure for winter. We didn't find any cabin. It's pretty remote. You'd have to know exactly where to look. Officer Morrow closed her notebook and studied my face. Mr. Reed, I have to ask, were you and your brother having any kind of dispute? Any reason he might have been upset or acting erratically? No more than usual. Jake was always a little hot-headed, but we got along fine. What about your wife? How did she and Jake get along? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications. I met Officer Morrow's eyes steadily. They got along fine. Jake was Maddie's favorite uncle. He was part of the family. After 2 hours of questions, Officer Morrow let me go with instructions to call if I remembered anything that might be relevant to the investigation. I drove home slowly, taking the long way around the lake, trying to prepare myself for what came next. Darla was waiting for me when I got home. She was sitting on the front porch with a suitcase beside her, and her face was streaked with tears. I heard about Jake, she said when I got out of the truck. Yeah, it's terrible. She studied my face, looking for something I wasn't sure she'd find. Where were you when it happened? Working. Officer Morrow already checked my schedule. That's not what I meant. I sat down on the porch steps, suddenly exhausted. What did you mean? I meant, did you have anything to do with Jake being in those woods? We looked at each other for a long moment, husband and wife, two people who'd shared 20 years of marriage and were now sharing 20 years of lies. Why would you ask me that? I said finally. Because I know you, Eli. I know how your mind works. And I know you've been acting strange since the party. My brother is dead, Darla. I'm allowed to act strange. She picked up her suitcase and stood up. I'm going to stay with my sister for a while, until after the funeral at least. Probably a good idea. Is there anything you want to tell me? Anything at all? I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and saw a woman I didn't recognize. The girl I'd married was gone, replaced by someone who'd been lying to me for longer than we'd been telling the truth. Yeah, I said, I know about Maddie. Darla's face went white. What about Maddie? I know she's Jake's daughter. I know you two have been having an affair for 20 years. I know everything. She sat back down heavily, the suitcase falling over beside her. How? DNA test. Maddie told me what she overheard you and Jake arguing about. Oh, God. She put her face in her hands. Eli, I can explain. Can you? Because Jake tried to explain and it didn't go very well for him. She looked up at me sharply. What does that mean? It means I'm done with explanations. I'm done with lies. I'm done with both of you. Darla left that afternoon, and I didn't try to stop her. The house felt different without her in it. Cleaner somehow, like a wound that had finally been allowed to heal. The funeral was held a week later at the Methodist church in town. Half the county showed up because Jake had been well-liked despite his flaws. I sat in the front row with Darla and Maddie, playing the role of the grieving brother while people offered their condolences and shared memories of Jake's life. Maddie hadn't spoken to me since learning about her father's death. She sat between me and Darla during the service, but she might as well have been 1,000 miles away. I could feel her anger and confusion radiating off her like heat. After the burial, people gathered at the church hall for food and more stories about Jake. I was standing near the coffee table, listening to one of Jake's coworkers talk about what a good guy he'd been, when Maddie finally approached me. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. We walked outside into the parking lot, away from the crowd and the noise. "Did you kill him?" she asked without preamble. The question hit me like a slap. "What? Did you kill Jake? Because of what I told you?" I looked at my daughter, Jake's daughter, and saw myself reflected in her eyes. The same stubborn determination, the same refusal to accept easy answers. "No," I said. "I didn't kill him." "But you were with him when he died." "No, I wasn't." "Don't lie to me, Dad. I've had enough lies." I was quiet for a long moment, trying to figure out how to tell her the truth without destroying what was left of our relationship. "I confronted him," I said finally. "I took him to the woods and I confronted him about you, about your mother, about everything. We argued and I left him there, but I didn't kill him." "You left him alone in the woods?" "He was a grown man, Maddie. He knew how to take care of himself." She stared at me for a long time and I could see her trying to decide whether to believe me or hate me. "He was my father," she said finally. "Yes, he was. But you're still my daughter." "Am I? Because right now, I don't know who you are anymore." She walked away then, back toward the church hall. And I knew I'd lost her too. Jake and Darla had taken everything from me, and even in death, they were still taking more. But I wasn't done with them yet. 3 months after Jake's funeral, Darla filed for divorce. She wanted half of everything: the house, my pension, my savings, even the cabin where her lover had died. She claimed I was emotionally abusive, that I'd driven her to seek comfort elsewhere, that the breakdown of our marriage was entirely my fault. She hired a lawyer from the city, a sharp-dressed woman who specialized in taking men to the cleaners. They painted me as a controlling husband who'd isolated Darla from her friends and family, who'd refused to seek counseling, who'd abandoned her in her time of grief. What they didn't count on was my patience and my attention to detail. 20 years as a game warden had taught me how to track prey, how to gather evidence, and how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. I hired my own lawyer, a local man named Tom Bradley who'd handled my father's estate and knew how small towns worked. Tom was in his 60s, with white hair and a grandfatherly manner that hid a sharp legal mind. "She's claiming adultery drove her to seek comfort with your brother," Tom told me during our first meeting. "But if we can prove the affair started before any problems in your marriage, we can turn that around on her." "How do we prove that?" "We start digging. Phone records, credit card statements, witness testimony. If they've been carrying on for 20 years, there's got to be evidence." Tom was right. Once we started looking, the evidence was everywhere. Hotel receipts from business trips Jake and Darla had taken together, cell phone records showing hundreds of calls and text messages between them, credit card charges at restaurants where they'd met for lunch while I was at work. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. I was cleaning out Jake's house, which had been left to me in his will, when I found a shoebox hidden in his bedroom closet. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written by Darla over the years. Love letters, explicit letters, letters talking about their future together and how they wished they could be open about their relationship. The letters were dated, starting from just after Darla and I were married and continuing right up until a few weeks before Jake's death. They painted a clear picture of a long-term affair, complete with plans to leave me once Maddie was out of college. "This is a gold mine," Tom said when I showed him the letters. "She can't claim temporary insanity or marital problems when we have evidence of a 20-year affair." The divorce proceedings turned ugly fast. Darla's lawyer accused me of breaking into Jake's house and planting evidence. They claimed the letters were forgeries, that I was trying to destroy Darla's reputation out of spite. But handwriting experts confirmed the letters were genuine, and the dates on the postmarks corroborated the timeline. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Darla's lawyer advised her to settle out of court. I gave her the bare minimum required by law enough to rent a small apartment and get by for a few years. Everything else, including the house and the cabin, stayed with me. But money wasn't really what I was after. I wanted something more valuable than cash. I wanted her reputation. The annual Harvest Festival was held in October, 6 months after Jake's death. It was the biggest social event of the year in our small town, with food booths, craft vendors, and a beer garden that stayed open until midnight. Everyone who was anyone would be there. I'd been planning for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal what I'd learned about my wife and brother. The festival would give me an audience, and the public setting would prevent Darla from simply walking away. I found her near the bandstand, surrounded by her usual group of friends and admirers. She was wearing a black dress, still playing the grieving sister-in-law, and holding a cup of wine. She looked beautiful and vulnerable, exactly the image she'd been cultivating since Jake's death. "Hello, Darla," I said, approaching the group. The conversation stopped immediately. Everyone in town knew about our divorce, and most people had chosen sides. Darla's friends closed ranks around her, but I could see the curiosity in their eyes. "Eli," Darla said coldly, "I didn't expect to see you here. Wouldn't miss it. I have something I wanted to share with everyone." I pulled out a manila envelope and removed several of the letters Jake had hidden in his closet. I'd made copies and highlighted the most damaging passages. "I found these when I was cleaning out Jake's house," I said, loud enough for nearby conversations to stop. "I thought people might be interested in reading them since there's been so much speculation about why our marriage ended." Darla's face went white. "You can't what? Share letters that my wife wrote to my brother? Letters where she talks about how much she loves him, how she wishes they could be together, how she's been lying to me for 20 years? I started reading from one of the letters, my voice carrying across the crowd that was gathering around us. "My dearest Jake, I can't stand pretending anymore. Every time Eli touches me, I think about you. Every time he says he loves me, I want to scream that I belong to someone else. If it wasn't for Maddie, I would leave him tomorrow and we could finally be together." The crowd was dead silent now, hanging on every word. I could see phones coming out, people recording what was happening. "This one's from last year," I continued, pulling out another letter. "I know you think we should wait until Maddie graduates college, but I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of living a lie. Eli suspects something. He's been asking questions about us. Maybe it's time to tell him the truth." "Stop," Darla whispered, but I wasn't finished. "And this one's my personal favorite," I said, unfolding a third letter. "Do you remember the night Maddie was conceived? We were so careless, but I'm glad we were. Every time I look at her, I see you. Sometimes I think Eli knows she's not his, but he loves her too much to ask questions. We gave him a beautiful daughter, even if he'll never know she's really ours." Darla lunged for the letters, but I stepped back, keeping them out of her reach. 20 years, I said to the crowd. 20 years of marriage, and it was all a lie. My wife was sleeping with my brother, my daughter isn't my daughter, and everyone in this town probably knew except me. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see shock, disgust, and pity on the faces around me. Some people were staring at Darla. Others were looking at me with something like admiration. "You bastard," Darla hissed. "How could you do this to me? How could I do this to you?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You destroyed my life, Darla. You and Jake made a fool out of me for 20 years. This is just returning the favor." I folded the letters and put them back in the envelope. "Enjoy the festival, everyone," I said. "And don't believe everything people tell you about their marriages. Sometimes the truth is more interesting than the fiction." I walked away then, leaving Darla standing in the middle of a crowd that was already starting to whisper and point. By morning, everyone in town would know what she'd done. By the end of the week, she'd probably have to leave town entirely. It was exactly what I'd been hoping for. The final piece of my revenge came 2 weeks later when Maddie called me for the first time since the funeral. "I heard what you did at the festival," she said without preamble. "Did you?" "Mom's moving to Florida. She says she can't show her face in town anymore." "Probably for the best." There was a long pause before Maddie spoke again. "I found something in Jake's house, something I think you should see." We met at a coffee shop in the city, the same place where she'd first told me about overhearing Darla and Jake arguing. This time she was the one with evidence to share. "I went to the house before the estate sale," she said, sliding a small wooden box across the table. "I wanted something to remember him by. I found this hidden behind some books in his bedroom." I opened the box and found a collection of photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. The photos showed Maddie at various ages, as a baby, a toddler, a child, a teenager. The newspaper clippings were from her school activities, her academic achievements, her college acceptance. The notes were in Jake's handwriting, documenting moments in Maddie's life like a father keeping track of his daughter's milestones. He loved you, I said, looking through the collection. In his own way, he really loved you. I know, and I think, in his own way, he loved you too. I looked up at my daughter, Jake's daughter, and saw something in her face that hadn't been there since before the funeral. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. Does this change anything? I asked. I don't know. Maybe. I'm still angry at all of you, at him for lying, at Mom for lying, at you for what you did in the woods. I didn't kill him, Maddie. I know, but you didn't save him either. She was right, and we both knew it. I'd left Jake alone in those woods, knowing he might not make it back. I hadn't pulled the trigger, but I'd loaded the gun. What happens now? I asked. I don't know. I'm going to finish college, figure out what I want to do with my life. Maybe someday we can have a relationship again. But not yet. I understand. She stood up to leave, then turned back to me. For what it's worth, you're still my dad. Biology doesn't change that. After she left, I sat in the coffee shop for a long time, looking through Jake's collection of memories. Pictures of a daughter he'd loved but could never claim. Achievements he'd celebrated in secret. A life he'd watched from the shadows. In the end, maybe we'd all gotten what we deserved. Darla had lost her reputation and her home. Jake had lost his life. I'd lost my family. And Maddie had lost the only father she'd ever known, even if he hadn't been the man she'd thought he was. I drove home as the sun was setting, past the lake where I'd lived my whole life, past the town where everyone now knew my story. The house was empty and quiet, but for the first time in months, it felt like home. I'd gotten my revenge, but it had cost me everything I'd ever cared about. The question was whether it had been worth it. As I sat on my porch that night, listening to the sound of loons calling across the water, I realized I finally knew the answer. It had been worth every moment of pain, every sleepless night, every relationship I'd lost. Because for the first time in 20 years, I was living in the truth instead of someone else's lie. And that was something Jake and Darla could never take away from me.